I remember noticing the first knock because it didn't fit the rest of the evening. It was a quiet night. Nothing unusual, just the low sound of my TV and the ceiling fan clicking every few seconds. The knock was steady, 4 times, evenly spaced, and then it stopped. I waited a few seconds, thinking maybe it was someone at the wrong house, but something about how deliberate it sounded stuck with me. At the time, I was living alone in a rented ground floor unit at the edge of a small housing complex. It wasn't isolated, but it wasn't busy either. There were maybe 10 units total, all arranged in 2 rows facing each other with a narrow driveway in between. Most people kept to themselves. I worked remotely doing customer support, so I spent most of my time at home. My routine was pretty predictable. Work during the day, quick grocery runs in the evening, then TV or YouTube until I went to bed. I didn't really get visitors. If anyone came by, they'd text first. That's why the knock felt out of place. I got up and went to the door, but I didn't open it right away. There was no peephole, so I checked through the side window instead. From the angle, I could see part of the front step. A man was standing there, holding what looked like a small package. Brown box. Nothing special. I opened the door just enough to keep the latch engaged. He told me he had a delivery that needed his signature. He said a name I didn't recognize, not even close to mine. I told him that, and he paused for a second, then looked down at the box like he was double-checking. Then, he read out my exact address. That part caught me off guard. I told him again, no one by that name lived there. He stared at me for a moment longer than necessary, then said he'd sort it out and come back another time. He turned and walked off. I watched him from the doorway. He went down the driveway, past the other units, and out toward the main road. I didn't see any delivery vehicles. No van, no bike, nothing. I closed the door and locked it, but I didn't think too much about it after that. I figured maybe he parked somewhere farther down, or it was some independent courier. The next night, around the same time, just before 9, I heard the knock again. Same pattern, 4 knocks. This time, I didn't open the door right away. I went straight to the window and looked out. It was the same guy, same jacket, same box. I didn't open the door. I just spoke through it. I told him he came the night before and that he was in the wrong place. There was a short pause. Then he said he still needed a signature because the system showed it hadn't been delivered. I told him I wasn't signing for a name I didn't know. Another pause. Then he said okay, but he didn't leave right away. I stayed by the window and watched him. He stepped back from the door and just stood there for a few seconds, looking at the front of my unit. His head turned slowly, like he was taking in the windows, the layout, the neighboring doors. Then, he finally walked away. Again, no vehicle. That's when it started to feel off. On the 3rd night, there was no knock. I actually felt relieved. I remember thinking it was probably just some mix-up that finally got sorted. The 4th night changed that. I was in the kitchen heating up leftovers when I heard the first knock, but it wasn't on the front door. It came from the side wall, near the small window above the sink. 4 taps, same rhythm. I froze for a second, trying to figure out what I just heard. Then, almost immediately, there were 4 knocks at the front door. I turned off the stove and walked slowly toward the living room. I didn't turn on any extra lights. When I checked the window, he was there again, but this time, he wasn't holding a box. His hands were empty. I didn't say anything. He knocked again, slower this time, not as even. Then he leaned slightly forward, like he was trying to look through the door. I stepped back so he wouldn't see movement through the window. After about half a minute, he stepped away and walked off again. I didn't relax after that. I checked all the windows and doors, even the ones I never used. Everything was locked, but I still felt like I'd missed something. The next morning, I asked one of my neighbors if they'd seen a delivery guy around. She said no. No one had been making deliveries that late, at least not in our complex. That night, I kept all the lights off in the front room and stayed in my bedroom with the door closed. At 8:50, right on time, the knocking started again. 4 knocks at the front door. I stayed completely still. Then, 4 more. Then, silence. I thought maybe he'd leave, but after about a minute, I heard something from the back of the unit. A soft thud. Then another. My back door opened into a small shared walkway that wasn't visible from the front. I moved slowly into the hallway, trying not to make noise. Then, I heard it clearly. The back doorknob, turning, not rattling, not shaking, turning slowly, like someone was testing it. It stopped. Then, I turned again, That's when I grabbed my phone and called the police. I kept my voice low and told them someone was trying to get into my apartment. While I was on the call, the front door started again. 4 knocks, then 4 more. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way and to stay inside. At the back door, I heard a faint scraping sound, metal against wood, like something being wedged near the lock. Then, everything stopped. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I stayed on the line until the police arrived. When they checked the back door, they found fresh marks near the handle. The officer pointed out where something had been used to try and pry it open. He asked if I knew who it could be. I told him about the past few nights, about the man with the box. He nodded and said it sounded like someone checking if units were occupied. He told me not to open the door for anyone I wasn't expecting, and to call immediately if it happened again. The next night, I didn't stay there. I went to a friend's place across town. I didn't tell anyone in the complex I was leaving. I just locked everything up and went. Around 9:10, my phone rang. It was my neighbor. She said someone had been knocking on my door for several minutes. I asked if she saw a vehicle. She said no. I told her to call the police. Later that night, an officer called me back. They had found the man, still at my door. He told them he was trying to deliver a package but couldn't find it. He didn't have any company ID, no uniform, no vehicle nearby. They warned him and told him to leave. 2 days later, they caught him in another part of town. He had been trying to force his way into a house while the owners were away. In his car, they found several empty cardboard boxes and a handheld device he used to make it look like a real delivery. During questioning, he admitted he would go door to door with fake packages. If someone answered, he'd mark the place as occupied and move on. If no one answered after a few visits, he'd come back later and try to break in. He said sometimes he knocked multiple nights in a row to see if anything changed. Lights on, lights off. Different responses. Hearing that made everything click. The timing, the repeated visits, the way he stood there, watching. If I hadn't answered that first night, or if I'd ignored him the second, he might have assumed no one was home and come back expecting an empty place. I moved out a couple months later when my lease ended. Since then, I don't open the door at night unless I'm expecting someone. If there's a knock I'm not prepared for, I stay quiet and check first. And if someone ever shows up with a package that has my address but not my name, I don't even go near the door anymore.